Chapter 1. Stop announcing. Start executing. Most people fail before they even begin. Not because they lack talent. Not because they lack intelligence. But because they talk too much. They announce their goals. They post their plans. They explain what they're about to do. And in doing so, they kill their momentum. You need to understand this clearly. You have a choice. You can announce your intentions, or you can build results. You cannot do both at the same time. That's the key. The human brain rewards talking about a goal the same way it rewards achieving it. When you tell people what you're going to do, your mind feels progress that hasn't happened yet. False progress. Fake satisfaction. And once you feel satisfied, urgency dies. That's why most people feel motivated but never move. They already collected the reward, through attention. It's not about motivation. It's about discipline. Strong people understand this instinctively. They move in silence. They don't announce upgrades. They don't warn the world. They just work. You don't need their permission. You don't need their approval. And you definitely don't need their applause. Every time you explain your plans, you invite doubt. Every time you announce a goal, you invite comparison. Every time you speak too early, you weaken your resolve. That's not strength. That's insecurity. You have a choice. Seek validation or build power. Look around you. The loudest people are usually the weakest. They talk because they need reassurance. They post because they need to feel seen. They explain because they're unsure. Quiet people don't need reassurance. They already decided. That's the difference. Mental toughness begins the moment you stop narrating your life. It begins when your mouth closes and your actions speak. That's the key. If you want to build discipline, stop telling people what you're about to do. Tell them what you've done, later. Or better yet, say nothing at all. Silence creates pressure. Pressure creates focus. Focus creates results. Noise destroys all three. Think about this carefully. How many times have you shared a plan that never happened? How many times did excitement replace execution? That's not bad luck. That's a pattern. And patterns don't break themselves. You break them by changing behavior. Starting now. Here is the rule you must adopt if you want mental toughness. No announcements without evidence. No posts. No explanations. No speeches. Only work. That's the key. You don't need their permission to change. You don't need their permission to disappear. You don't need their permission to rebuild yourself quietly. You are not here to entertain observers. You are here to become dangerous to your old limits. And dangerous people don't broadcast. Every elite performer understands this. Athletes train in silence. Operators move without attention. Builders stay invisible until the structure is finished. Only amateurs show the blueprint. You have a choice. Be an amateur or be disciplined. Now let's get practical. From today forward, apply this rule. If it matters, keep it quiet. Your workouts, silent. Your study sessions, silent. Your goals, silent. Not because you're ashamed, but because you're serious. That's the difference most people never learn. They think silence is weakness. It's not. Silence is containment. It's control. It's power held back until the right moment. And mental toughness is all about control. Control over your mouth. Control over your impulses. Control over your need to be seen. You don't need their permission. When you stop announcing, something powerful happens. Your energy turns inward. Your focus sharpens. Your discipline deepens. You stop performing. You start building. That's the key. This chapter isn't about being secretive. It's about being intentional. Because every word you speak is energy spent. And weak people spend energy on noise. Strong people invest energy in execution. Ask yourself this honestly. Do you want attention now, or respect later? Because you can't have both. Respect comes from results. Results come from silence. This is where mental toughness begins. Not in confidence. Not in hype. But in restraint. And restraint is uncomfortable. It will feel strange not to explain yourself. It will feel lonely not to announce progress. It will feel difficult not to seek validation. Good. That discomfort is proof you're changing. You have a choice. Feed your ego, or feed your discipline. And remember this line. Burn it into your mind. Move in silence. Let results make the noise. That's the foundation. You've learned to stop announcing. You've learned to stop leaking energy. You've learned to protect your focus. Now you're ready for the next level. Because silence doesn't just protect your goals. It gives you an advantage most people never access. You mastered the discipline of not speaking too early. Now let's talk about why silence itself is power. Chapter 2. The silent advantage nobody talks about. Silence is not empty. Silence is not weakness. Silence is not hesitation. Silence is an advantage. Most people don't understand this because they live in noise. They think progress needs visibility. They think growth needs feedback. They think confidence needs confirmation. It doesn't. You have a choice. Operate in noise, or operate with precision. That's the key. Silence removes distractions that most people don't even notice. It removes comparison. It removes pressure. It removes the need to perform. And when those things disappear, something powerful takes their place. Focus. Real focus. When no one is watching, you stop pretending. When no one is judging, you stop posturing. When no one is expecting updates, you move at your own pace. That's where real work happens. Most people slow down because they're being watched. They start managing perception instead of progress. They adjust their actions to look good instead of becoming good. That's the trap. It's not about looking disciplined. It's about being disciplined. Silence frees you from the opinions of people who aren't building anything themselves. And that freedom is rare. You don't need their permission to move quietly. You don't need their permission to take longer than expected. You don't need their permission to fail privately. Failure in silence is education. Failure in public becomes shame. That's the key. This is why the strongest transformations happen away from attention. Weight loss, skill mastery, mental resilience. All of it grows faster when no one is commenting on it. Noise creates pressure. Pressure creates anxiety. Anxiety creates inconsistency. Silence creates stability. And mental toughness is built on stability. Think about this. When you tell people what you're doing, you lock yourself into timelines you didn't choose. You rush. You force progress. You cut corners. Not because you want to, but because eyes are on you. Silence removes that pressure. You move when you're ready. You adjust when needed. You rebuild when something breaks. That flexibility is an advantage most people never allow themselves to have. You have a choice. Rush for approval or move with precision. That's the key. Elite performers understand this deeply. They disappear during preparation phases. They resurface only when the work is complete. Why? Because preparation requires privacy. You cannot sharpen a blade in front of a crowd. You cannot harden your mind while entertaining observers. Silence protects the process. And process is everything. If you want mental toughness, you must learn to love working without witnesses. No praise. No encouragement. No recognition. Just effort. This is where most people quit. Not because the work is hard, but because the silence is uncomfortable. They want reassurance. They want confirmation. They want someone to say, "You're doing great." You don't need that. You need discipline. That's the key. Here's a hard truth. If you require external validation to continue, you will never be mentally tough. Mental toughness is self-fueled. It runs on internal standards, not external applause. And silence strengthens that internal system. Because when no one is watching, you find out who you really are. Do you still show up? Do you still train? Do you still focus? That's the test. And tests are meant to be taken alone. Silence also protects you from comparison. Comparison is poison. It distorts progress. It creates impatience. You don't see the full picture of anyone else's life. But noise convinces you that you do. Silence removes that illusion. You stop measuring yourself against others. You start measuring yourself against yesterday. That's real progress. You have a choice. Compete with others, or compete with yourself. That's the key. Now let's get practical again. Here is a discipline you must adopt. Create silent work blocks. No phone. No updates. No announcements. Just time and effort. If you train, train quietly. If you study, study quietly. If you build, build quietly. Let days pass without anyone knowing what you're doing. Not because you're hiding, but because you're focusing. Silence turns effort into momentum. Momentum turns consistency into identity. And identity is what mental toughness really is. Not something you do, something you become. Most people never experience this advantage because they can't tolerate being unseen. They confuse visibility with value. But value is created in silence. Visibility comes later. Always later. You don't need their permission to delay recognition. You don't need their permission to move quietly. You don't need their permission to take the long road. That's the key. Silence also teaches patience. And patience is a form of strength. When nothing happens immediately, weak minds quit. Strong minds stay. They trust the process. They trust repetition. They trust time. Silence forces you to trust yourself. And that's uncomfortable at first. But discomfort is where growth lives. Remember this. Noise excites. Silence builds. Noise motivates. Silence hardens. Noise feels good. Silence makes you dangerous. You have a choice. Now you understand the advantage. Silence removes pressure. Silence sharpens focus. Silence builds internal strength. But there is something even more important you must learn next. Because silence alone is not enough. You must learn what sustains you when motivation disappears. What carries you through boredom? What keeps you moving when excitement dies? You've learned why silence matters. Now it's time to understand what actually powers consistency. Chapter 3. Motivation is loud. Discipline is quiet. Motivation makes promises. Discipline keeps them. Motivation is emotional. Discipline is mechanical. Motivation talks. Discipline works. If you remember nothing else from this chapter, remember this. Motivation is unreliable. Discipline is permanent. That's the key. Most people wait to feel ready. They wait to feel inspired. They wait for the mood to be right. And while they wait, nothing happens. You have a choice. Obey your feelings, or command your actions. Mental toughness begins the moment feelings stop being in charge. Motivation comes and goes. It rises with excitement. It disappears with boredom, stress, or discomfort. Discipline doesn't care how you feel. It doesn't negotiate. It doesn't ask questions. It simply executes. It's not about motivation. It's about discipline. Motivated people start fast. Disciplined people finish strong. This is why so many people begin journeys they never complete. They confuse emotional energy with structural strength. Motivation feels powerful, but it has no endurance. Discipline feels boring, but it lasts. That's the difference. Look at your past honestly. How many times did motivation push you to start something? And how many times did lack of motivation stop you from continuing? That's not coincidence. That's dependence. And dependence is weakness. You don't need motivation to train. You need a schedule. You don't need motivation to study. You need a system. That's the key. Discipline removes decision-making. You don't wake up and debate. You don't negotiate with your mood. You do what was decided yesterday. Strong people decide once. Weak people decide every day. And daily decisions drain energy. Mental toughness conserves energy by eliminating unnecessary choices. You train because it's training time. You work because it's work time. You rest because it's rest time. No drama. No emotion. No excuses. You have a choice. Build systems. or rely on feelings. Feelings fluctuate. Systems compound. That's the key. Motivation wants intensity. Discipline wants consistency. Motivation says, go hard today. Discipline says, show up every day. And showing up wins. This is why boring routines create extraordinary results. Because boredom filters out weak minds. If you can do something even when it feels dull, repetitive, and unrewarding, you are building mental toughness. That's what most people can't tolerate. They want excitement. They want novelty. They want quick feedback. Discipline denies all of that. And that's why it works. Here's the truth most people avoid. If you only work when you're motivated, you're not disciplined. You're emotional. And emotions make terrible leaders. You don't need their permission to stop chasing motivation. You don't need their permission to build discipline quietly. You don't need their permission to be consistent instead of impressive. That's the key. Let's get practical again. Here is how discipline is actually built. You set non-negotiable rules. Not goals. Rules. Goals are aspirational. Rules are mandatory. A goal says, I'll try. A rule says, this happens no matter what. Example. I train 4 days a week. No emotion attached. No debate. I read 10 pages every day. Not when I feel like it. Every day. This removes motivation from the equation. You stop asking, do I feel like it? And start asking, is this the time? That's discipline. And discipline is quiet. No announcements. No speeches. No hype. Just execution. Mental toughness grows when you do the work on days you feel flat. On days you feel tired. On days you feel uninspired. Especially those days. Because those are the days that separate disciplined people from emotional ones. You have a choice. Be consistent, or be comfortable. Comfort creates stagnation. Consistency creates strength. That's the key. Motivation loves beginnings. Discipline survives middles. And the middle is where most people quit. When progress slows. When results are invisible. When praise disappears. Discipline carries you through that desert. Silence helps here too. When no one is watching, you don't need to look motivated. You just need to show up. And showing up builds identity. Eventually, you stop saying, I'm trying. You start saying, this is who I am. That's mental toughness. Not effort. Not intensity. Identity. You don't need motivation to brush your teeth. You don't need motivation to get dressed. You do it because it's part of who you are. Your discipline must reach that level. Automatic. Unemotional. Unquestioned. That's the key. Now listen carefully. Motivation is a tool. Discipline is a foundation. Use motivation when it appears. But never depend on it. Depend on structure. Depend on repetition. Depend on rules. Because when motivation leaves, and it will, discipline stays. You have a choice. Build a life powered by moods. Or build a life powered by standards. Standards don't care how you feel. And neither should you. You've learned why motivation fails. You've learned why discipline wins. You've learned how silence and structure work together. Now you're ready for a deeper truth. Because discipline doesn't just require consistency. It requires sacrifice. And sacrifice often means standing alone. You mastered the difference between motivation and discipline. Now let's talk about the cost of real strength. Chapter 4. Loneliness is the price of strength. If you are serious about becoming mentally tough, you must accept this early. Strength separates. Growth isolates. Discipline creates distance. Loneliness is not a mistake. Loneliness is a signal. You have a choice. Belong to the crowd, or build yourself beyond it. That's the key. Most people fear loneliness more than failure. They would rather stay weak together than grow strong alone. That's why they stay comfortable. That's why they stay average. That's why they never change. When you choose discipline, your schedule changes. Your priorities shift. Your tolerance for nonsense disappears. And when that happens, People notice. Not everyone will understand. Not everyone will support you. Some will feel threatened. Others will feel abandoned. That's normal. It's not about being liked. It's about being aligned. Alignment with your standards. Alignment with your goals. Alignment with the person you're becoming. Loneliness shows up when alignment replaces approval. That's the key. You will spend more time alone. More time thinking. More time working without company. This is where weak minds panic. They mistake solitude for failure. They confuse quiet with emptiness. But solitude is where strength is refined. Every mentally tough individual has gone through this phase. Athletes during off-season training. Entrepreneurs before breakthroughs. Warriors before battles. Isolation precedes elevation. You don't need their permission to walk this path. You don't need their permission to say no. You don't need their permission to protect your time. Time is your most valuable resource. And lonely seasons are often the most productive. That's the key. Loneliness teaches you self-reliance. When no one checks on you, you learn to check yourself. When no one motivates you, you learn to move anyway. This builds internal strength. External support is helpful, but it is optional. Internal discipline is mandatory. If your progress depends on company, it will collapse in isolation. Mental toughness means you can operate alone, calmly, consistently, without emotional support. That doesn't mean you hate people. It means you respect your mission. And missions require sacrifice. Here is a hard truth you must face. As you improve, your circle will shrink. Not because you're better than others, but because your standards are different. Different standards create different lifestyles. Different lifestyles create distance. That distance feels like loneliness at first. Later, it feels like freedom. That's the key. Most people numb loneliness with distraction. Endless scrolling. Unnecessary conversations. Cheap entertainment. They fill silence because silence forces self-reflection. And self-reflection is uncomfortable. But discomfort is where growth lives. If you run from loneliness, you run from strength. You have a choice. Escape discomfort, or let it shape you. Now let's get practical. Here is how you use loneliness instead of fearing it. First, stop labeling it as something negative. Loneliness is not punishment. It's preparation. Second, use alone time intentionally. Train, read, reflect, build. No wasted hours. Third, reduce unnecessary social obligations. Not everything deserves your presence. Not everyone deserves your energy. That's not arrogance. That's discipline. You don't need their permission to choose yourself. Loneliness also reveals who truly belongs in your future. Some people disappear when you stop entertaining them. Others remain when you stop performing. Pay attention. Mental toughness includes emotional clarity. You learn who adds value and who drains it. That clarity only comes in quiet seasons. This is why silence and loneliness are connected. Silence removes noise. Loneliness removes dependency. Together, they build independence. And independence is strength. You have a choice. Be supported or be strong. Sometimes, you cannot have both at the same time. This is temporary. Lonely seasons do not last forever. But their impact does. They build discipline. They sharpen focus. They harden resolve. Later, when people see your results, they'll call it confidence. They'll call it talent. They'll call it luck. They won't see the lonely nights, the quiet mornings, the unseen effort. That's fine. You didn't do it for them. That's the key. Loneliness also breaks your need to explain yourself. When no one is around, there is no one to convince. You stop talking. You start doing. And doing builds certainty. Eventually, loneliness transforms into peace. You enjoy your own company. You trust your own decisions. You no longer fear being misunderstood. Because you understand yourself. That's mental toughness. Not loud confidence. Not aggressive dominance. Quiet certainty. You don't need their permission to be alone. You don't need their permission to focus. You don't need their permission to evolve. This chapter matters because many people quit here. Not because the work is hard, but because the isolation feels heavy. If you can stay during this phase, you separate yourself permanently. You have a choice. Run back to comfort, or stay in the forge. Because loneliness is the forge. You've accepted solitude. You've accepted distance. You've accepted the price of strength. Now it's time to remove the final weakness loneliness exposes. The need to explain yourself. You embraced being alone. Now let's talk about why strong people stop justifying their choices. Chapter 5. Stop explaining yourself. Explaining yourself is a weakness most people never notice. They think it's politeness. They think it's clarity. They think it's communication. It's not. Most explanations are disguised insecurity. You have a choice. Justify your decisions, or stand on them. That's the key. Strong people don't over-explain. They decide. They act. They move on. Weak people explain because they want approval. They want understanding. They want agreement. But agreement is not required for progress. You don't need their permission. Every time you explain yourself unnecessarily, you hand over power. You invite opinions. You invite resistance. You invite doubt. And doubt is contagious. This is especially dangerous when you're changing, when you're upgrading your habits, when you're shifting your priorities. People don't resist your growth because it's wrong. They resist it because it reminds them of what they're avoiding. That's the truth. So they question you. They challenge you. They ask, "Why are you doing this?" And you fall into the trap. You start explaining. That's the key moment you must learn to stop. Because explanations don't convince strong minds. They only energize weak ones. It's not about being understood. It's about being disciplined. Explaining yourself drains energy. It forces you to relive decisions you've already made. It pulls you backward. Mental toughness moves forward. You don't owe anyone a detailed breakdown of your choices. You don't owe anyone a defense of your discipline. You don't owe anyone comfort. Clarity comes from action, not words. That's the key. Think about the strongest people you know. They don't talk much. They don't justify much. They don't argue about their direction. They simply do what they said they would do. And eventually, people stop questioning them. Not because they explained better, but because their results became undeniable. That's how authority is built. Not through arguments. Through consistency. You have a choice. Speak to be liked, or stay silent and be respected. Now listen carefully. There is a difference between communication and explanation. Communication is necessary. Explanation is optional. Here's what I'm doing. That's communication. Here's why you should understand and agree with it. That's explanation. One is confident. The other is needy. Mental toughness eliminates neediness. That's the key. Most people explain because silence feels uncomfortable. They want to fill space. They want to smooth tension. They want reassurance. But tension is not a threat. Tension is a test. Can you hold your ground without over-talking? Can you stand firm without convincing anyone? That's strength. Silence after a decision is powerful. It says, "I'm not seeking approval." It says, "I trust myself." And trust in yourself is the foundation of discipline. You don't need their permission to be misunderstood. You don't need their permission to disappoint them. You don't need their permission to change. Here's another hard truth. The more you explain, the less serious you appear. Because explanations signal uncertainty. When you're sure, you don't argue. You move. That's the key. Let's get practical. From this point forward, adopt this rule. No explanations unless absolutely necessary. If someone questions your routine, keep it simple. "I'm focused right now." If someone challenges your discipline, stay calm. "This works for me." No speeches. No debates. No justifications. Short. Clear. Final. This protects your energy. Mental toughness is energy management. And explanations are leaks. Another reason to stop explaining yourself is this. Not everyone deserves access to your reasoning. Your goals are fragile in early stages. They need protection, not discussion. Explaining invites sabotage. Sometimes intentional, sometimes accidental. People project their fears onto your plans. Silence shields you from that. That's the key. You will notice something interesting when you stop explaining. Some people will push harder. They'll ask more questions. They'll pressure you. That's a test. If you cave and explain, you fail it. If you stay calm and silent, you pass. And after a while, the pressure stops. Because people only push when they sense weakness. Silence removes that signal. You have a choice. Defend your decisions, or enforce them. Enforcement doesn't require words. It requires consistency. This chapter matters because explanation keeps people stuck. They spend more time talking about change than making it. They explain instead of execute. You don't need to announce your discipline. You don't need to justify your isolation. You don't need to explain your silence. Let your habits do the talking. Eventually, the same people who questioned you will watch quietly. Some will respect you. Some will resent you. Both are fine. Your job is not to manage reactions. Your job is to manage behavior. That's mental toughness. Now understand this. When you stop explaining, you become unpredictable. People can't manipulate you through guilt. They can't pull you into arguments. They can't slow you down. And unpredictability is power. You don't need their permission to be firm. You don't need their permission to be brief. You don't need their permission to move forward without commentary. This chapter is about authority, not dominance, not aggression, quiet authority, the kind that comes from self-trust. You've learned to stop announcing. You've learned to work in silence. You've learned to accept loneliness. You've learned to stop explaining. Now there's one more weakness to remove. The need for applause. Because as long as you crave recognition, silence will always feel heavy. You stood firm without explanation. Now it's time to starve the final addiction. Chapter 6. Weak minds need applause. Applause is addictive. Approval is intoxicating. And both are dangerous. Most people don't realize they are addicted. They call it encouragement. They call it support. They call it motivation. It's not. It's dependence. You have a choice. Feed your ego, or starve it. That's the key. Weak minds need applause because they don't trust themselves. They need confirmation to continue. They need recognition to feel progress. Strong minds don't need any of that. They work whether anyone is watching or not. If your discipline collapses without praise, it was never discipline. It was performance. It's not about recognition. It's about discipline. Applause creates a dangerous loop. You act. You get praise. You crave more praise. You act again, but only if the praise continues. When the applause stops, so does the effort. That's why most people fade. Mental toughness breaks this loop. It teaches you to operate without feedback, without encouragement, without validation. Silence becomes normal. That's the key. Social attention trains people to confuse noise with progress. Likes feel like achievement. Comments feel like movement. But nothing actually changed. No skill was built. No habit was formed. No strength was earned. Applause rewards visibility, not mastery. And mastery doesn't care if anyone is clapping. You don't need their permission to stop performing. You don't need their permission to work unseen. You don't need their permission to grow privately. Here's a hard truth. If you need applause, you are easy to control. Take away praise, and you stop. Give praise, and you perform. That's not freedom. That's weakness. Mental toughness is independence from external reward. That's the key. Look at the strongest people in any field. They don't chase attention. Attention finds them later. While others were chasing applause, they were chasing standards. Standards don't clap. Standards don't cheer. Standards don't compliment. They demand. And demands build strength. You have a choice. Chase approval or obey standards. Approval feels good now. Standards pay off later. That's the key. This is why silence feels uncomfortable at first. There's no feedback loop. No dopamine hit. No reassurance. Just work. And work reveals truth. When there's no applause, excuses sound louder. Fatigue feels heavier. Doubt speaks clearer. This is where weak minds quit. Strong minds stay. Because they are not fueled by reaction. They are fueled by commitment. Let's get practical. From now on, remove applause as a requirement. Do not expect praise for discipline. Do not seek recognition for effort. Do not announce work for validation. If you train, train because it's training time. If you study, study because it's study time. If you build, build because that's the standard. No audience required. That's the key. Another important shift must happen. Stop rewarding yourself with attention. Reward yourself with consistency. Most people finish a small task and immediately seek acknowledgement. They post it. They talk about it. They want someone to say, "Good job." That trains weakness. Instead, let the reward be internal. I showed up. I kept my word. I didn't quit. Those quiet confirmations build real confidence. Confidence built on applause collapses under pressure. Confidence built on self-trust holds. You have a choice. Be confident when praised, or be confident always. That's the key. Applause also distorts priorities. People start doing what looks impressive instead of what works. They chase visibility. They avoid boring fundamentals. They sacrifice long-term growth for short-term praise. Mental toughness rejects this trade. It chooses boring excellence over flashy mediocrity. You don't need their permission to be boring. You don't need their permission to focus on fundamentals. You don't need their permission to ignore attention. Remember this. The more applause you need, the weaker your discipline. The less applause you need, the stronger your identity. Silence is not punishment. It's training. Training your mind to stand alone. And standing alone is power. This chapter matters because applause is subtle. It sneaks in. It feels harmless. But over time, it erodes self-control. If you want mental toughness, you must become immune to praise. Not arrogant. Not dismissive. Neutral. Praise neither excites you nor controls you. That's the goal. You've removed the need to announce. You've embraced silence. You've accepted loneliness. You've stopped explaining yourself. You've starved the need for applause. Now you are ready for a deeper test. Because when applause disappears and silence remains, pain shows up. And pain is the final teacher. You've learned to work without praise. Now you must learn to endure without complaint. Chapter 7. Pain is a private teacher. Pain doesn't announce itself. It doesn't ask for permission. It shows up when you're alone. And that's why most people misunderstand it. They complain. They dramatize. They broadcast their suffering. That turns pain into weakness. You have a choice. Use pain as a teacher, or use it as an excuse. That's the key. Pain is inevitable. Discomfort is guaranteed. Struggle is part of the process. Mental toughness is not the absence of pain. It is the refusal to be controlled by it. Weak minds talk about pain. Strong minds listen to it. Silently, pain teaches lessons that comfort never will. It exposes weak habits. It reveals false confidence. It shows you exactly where discipline is missing. That's why it hurts. It's not about avoiding pain. It's about learning from it. Most people rush to numb pain. Distractions, complaints, validation. They want sympathy. But sympathy does not strengthen you. It softens you. Mental toughness is built when pain is processed privately. No audience. No drama. No performance. Just awareness. That's the key. Pain becomes destructive when you resist it. It becomes useful when you study it. Ask better questions. What did this pain expose? Where did I cut corners? What standard did I ignore? Those answers are uncomfortable. That's why most people avoid them. You don't need their permission to suffer quietly. You don't need their permission to struggle without explaining. You don't need their permission to be uncomfortable. Silence turns pain into data, and data builds discipline. Think about this. Every setback contains information. Every failure points to a weakness. Every loss reveals a gap. But only if you're honest. Complaining drowns out that information. Broadcasting pain turns it into identity. You are not your pain. You are the student of it. That's the key. Mental toughness requires emotional containment. You feel everything, but you leak nothing. Not because you're cold, because you're controlled. Control is strength. Pain also teaches patience. Healing takes time. Growth takes time. Understanding takes time. Weak minds rush to escape discomfort. Strong minds stay present. They endure. Endurance is not passive. It's active restraint. Restraint from reacting. Restraint from quitting. Restraint from seeking comfort too early. You have a choice. React emotionally or respond strategically. That's the key. Let's get practical again. When pain shows up, do this. First, stop talking. Talking magnifies emotion. Second, keep routines intact. Pain is not an excuse to abandon standards. Train anyway. Work anyway. Show up anyway. Third, reflect privately. Journal. Think. Analyze. No posts. No speeches. This is how pain sharpens you instead of breaking you. Pain handled correctly increases self-respect. You realize you can endure more than you thought. That realization is powerful. Confidence built through pain is unshakable. It doesn't depend on mood. It doesn't collapse under pressure, because it was forged under stress. That's the key. Another hard truth. The strongest people you admire have suffered deeply. Not publicly. Not dramatically. Quietly. They didn't let pain define them. They let it refine them. And refinement is always uncomfortable. Pain also humbles you. It reminds you that effort does not guarantee success. That control is limited. That ego is fragile. This humility protects you from arrogance. Arrogance invites failure. Humility sustains growth. Mental toughness balances confidence with humility. Pain teaches that balance. You don't need their permission to endure quietly. You don't need their permission to heal privately. You don't need their permission to grow slowly. Silence gives pain space to work. And work it does. Eventually, pain stops feeling like punishment. It starts feeling like training. You expect it. You respect it. You use it. That shift changes everything. You stop fearing hard days. You stop running from discomfort. You stop collapsing under pressure. You become resilient. Resilience is not toughness. It's recovery. Mental toughness is built when you recover without attention. No applause. No sympathy. No validation. Just resilience. This chapter matters because pain is unavoidable. How you handle it determines who you become. Weak minds announce pain. Strong minds absorb it. You have a choice. Broadcast suffering or transform it. Now understand this. Pain prepares you for the next level. But preparation is not enough. You must also learn consistency when no one sees the effort. Because showing up once is easy. Showing up repeatedly, unseen, is discipline. You've learned to endure pain privately. Now you must learn to show up without reward. Chapter 8. The discipline of showing up unseen. Anyone can show up when they're noticed. Anyone can perform when there's recognition. Anyone can work when there's a reward waiting. Mental toughness is built somewhere else. It's built when no one is watching. When no one cares. When no one is counting your effort. You have a choice. Show up for attention, or show up for standards. That's the key. Most people associate effort with reward. They subconsciously ask, what do I get for this? And if the answer is nothing, they stop. That mindset creates weakness. Discipline does not require an audience. It requires commitment. It's not about being seen. It's about being consistent. Showing up unseen strips away illusion. There's no applause to hide behind. No praise to lean on. No pressure to perform. Just you and the work. This is where character is revealed. When there's no external incentive, the only thing that moves you is identity. Who you believe you are. What standard you refuse to break. That's the key. Weak minds show up conditionally. Strong minds show up automatically. They don't ask if today matters. They already decided that it does. This is why routines are powerful. They remove emotion. They remove negotiation. They remove excuse. You train because it's training time. You study because it's study time. You work because it's work time. No witnesses required. You don't need their permission to show up quietly. You don't need their permission to work without recognition. You don't need their permission to stay disciplined in private. Here's a truth that most people resist. The unseen representatives matter more than the visible ones. The workout no one knows about. The page you read when you were tired. The decision you made when quitting would have gone unnoticed. Those moments compound. And compounding doesn't announce itself. That's the key. Showing up unseen builds self-respect. You begin to trust yourself. You stop relying on external accountability. Because you are accountable. Mental toughness grows when you keep promises to yourself without witnesses. Broken promises weaken identity. Kept promises strengthen it. Silence amplifies this effect. No one can save you from yourself in silence. No one can pressure you. No one can motivate you. You either show up or you don't. And every time you do, something shifts internally. You stop asking, will this pay off? You start saying, this is who I am. That's mental toughness. You have a choice. Build habits for attention, or build habits for identity. Identity lasts. Attention fades. That's the key. Let's get practical. Here's how you train the discipline of showing up unseen. First, remove reward expectations. Stop expecting immediate payoff. Stop looking for signs. Trust repetition. Second, schedule your work in advance. Decide before emotion gets involved. When the time arrives, act. No debate. Third, track effort privately, not to show others. To hold yourself accountable. Quiet evidence beats loud intention. This trains you to respect yourself. Another important shift must happen. You must stop needing progress to feel exciting. Progress is often boring, uneventful, slow. Weak minds quit here. Strong minds stay. Because they understand this truth. Momentum is invisible at first. Silence is where momentum is built. You don't need their permission to be patient. You don't need their permission to work slowly. You don't need their permission to stay disciplined when nothing happens. That's the key. Showing up unseen also builds psychological strength. You stop fearing obscurity. You stop chasing validation. You stop measuring worth by reaction. This creates calm confidence. Confidence that doesn't spike with praise or crash with criticism. Because it wasn't built on either. You've endured pain. You've starved applause. Now you're learning consistency without reward. This is rare. Most people never develop this skill. That's why most people never change. They wait for motivation. They wait for recognition. They wait for permission. You don't. You show up anyway. This is why discipline feels lonely. Because it doesn't need company. And loneliness is no longer a threat to you. It's fuel. That's the key. Eventually, something interesting happens. People start noticing, but you don't care. Opportunities appear, but you're steady. Pressure increases, but you're calm. Because you already trained without reward. Public pressure feels light when you've carried private weight. That's mental toughness. This chapter matters because unseen discipline is the backbone of strength. Without it, everything collapses. You cannot fake consistency. You cannot fake standards. You cannot fake identity. Silence exposes the truth. You've learned to show up when no one sees. Now you must understand what that does to others. Because quiet consistency does something powerful. It unsettles people. It creates uncertainty. It creates respect and fear. You mastered discipline without witnesses. Now let's talk about the psychological effect of silence on the world around you. Chapter 9. Silence creates psychological fear in others. Silence makes people uncomfortable. Not because it's empty, but because it's unreadable. People fear what they can't predict. You have a choice. Be explainable or be unmovable. That's the key. Most people signal everything. Their emotions, their intentions, their next move. They talk before acting. They announce before executing. They complain before correcting. That makes them predictable. Predictable people are easy to ignore. Silent people are not. Silence creates uncertainty. Uncertainty creates tension. And tension commands attention. That's the psychological advantage. It's not about intimidating others. It's about controlling yourself. When you move quietly and consistently, people start asking questions internally. What are they doing? What do they know that I don't? Why aren't they reacting? Those questions create pressure. Not on you, on them. That's the key. Weak minds rely on noise to feel safe. They talk to reassure themselves. They share to feel validated. They react to feel in control. Silence removes those crutches. When you stop reacting, people lose leverage. They can't provoke you. They can't guilt you. They can't predict you. And unpredictability is power. You don't need their permission to be unreadable. You don't need their permission to withhold reaction. You don't need their permission to stay calm. Calmness under pressure unsettles emotional people because it exposes their lack of control. Think about this carefully. When someone insults you and you stay silent, who feels uncomfortable? When someone doubts you and you don't explain, who feels uncertain? When someone watches you improve without commentary, who feels threatened? Not you, them. That's the key. Silence reflects insecurity back to its source. It forces others to sit with their assumptions. And most people hate that. They want reassurance. They want reaction. They want confirmation. Silence denies all three. This doesn't make you cruel. It makes you controlled. Mental toughness is emotional regulation at its highest level. No outbursts. No overreactions. No defensive explanations. Just steady movement. You have a choice. React emotionally or remain composed. That's the key. Silent consistency also creates authority. People respect what they cannot manipulate. When you don't chase approval, approval follows. When you don't demand respect, respect appears. Not immediately, but inevitably. Because silence backed by results creates credibility. Words are cheap. Consistency is rare. That rarity creates psychological weight. People begin to measure themselves against you. Quietly. That's when fear appears. Not fear of you. Fear of comparison. Your discipline highlights their excuses. Your calm highlights their chaos. Your silence highlights their noise. That contrast is uncomfortable. And discomfort creates distance. Some people will pull away. Some will criticize. Some will try to provoke a reaction. That's the test. If you react, you lose the advantage. If you stay silent, you keep it. That's the key. Silence also protects you from emotional traps, arguments, drama, pointless debates. You stop wasting energy on people who are not building. Energy conserved is energy redirected. Mental toughness is efficient. Here's something most people don't realize. You don't need to dominate conversations to be dominant. You don't need to assert to be respected. You don't need to threaten to be feared. Consistency does all of that quietly. When people see you improving without announcement, they feel something shift. They don't know where you're headed. They don't know how far you've gone. They don't know when you'll arrive. That uncertainty creates space. Space for respect. Space for caution. Space for fear. You have a choice. Be visible or be formidable. Formidable people are not loud. They are consistent. That's the key. Let's get practical. Here's how you use silence strategically. First, stop reacting immediately. Pause. Observe. Respond only when necessary. Second, limit emotional transparency. Not everyone deserves access to your inner state. Third, let your habits speak. No updates. No explanations. Results change how people treat you, not arguments. You don't need their permission to stay silent under pressure. You don't need their permission to let others wonder. You don't need their permission to remain calm when tested. Silence also protects your future moves. People can't sabotage what they don't see coming. And sabotage often comes disguised as concern. Silence filters that out. This chapter matters because mental toughness isn't just internal. It has external effects. Your silence reshapes how others interact with you. They hesitate. They measure their words. They stop underestimating. Not because you demanded it, because you earned it. Silence backed by discipline is intimidating. Not aggressive intimidation. Controlled intimidation. The kind that comes from self-mastery. And self-mastery is the highest form of power. You've learned to stop announcing. You've learned to work in silence. You've learned to endure pain privately. You've learned to show up unseen. Now you're close to the final transformation. Because eventually, silence stops being a strategy. It becomes identity. You no longer need recognition. You no longer need reaction. You no longer need validation. You become solid, unshakable. You understand who you are. And when that happens, silence is no longer effort. It's natural. You've learned how silence affects others. Now let's finish where it all leads. Chapter 10. Become so solid you don't need recognition. At some point, something shifts. You stop looking around. You stop checking reactions. You stop wondering who noticed. Not because you're tired. Because you're solid. You have a choice. Live for recognition, or live from certainty. That's the key. Most people never reach this stage. They improve, but they still seek validation. They grow, but they still want applause. They made progress, but they didn't build identity. Mental toughness is not improvement alone. It is self-trust that no longer needs reinforcement. When you become solid, recognition becomes irrelevant. Not unwanted. Irrelevant. It's not about being praised. It's about being grounded. Solid people don't chase approval because approval doesn't change anything for them. They already know who they are. They already know what they can endure. They already know what they're capable of. That certainty is quiet. And that quiet is powerful. Recognition creates emotional spikes. Praise inflates. Criticism deflates. Solid people don't spike or dip. They stay steady. That's the key. You don't need their permission to trust yourself. You don't need their permission to feel complete. You don't need their permission to stop proving. Proving is a phase. Solidity is a state. When you are solid, you don't rush. You don't explain. You don't compete loudly. You move with patience. Because patience comes from security. Insecurity hurries. Security waits. Mental toughness matures into calm. Not arrogance. Not indifference. Calm control. This is what all the silence was building toward. Silence trained you to rely on yourself. Pain trained you to endure. Loneliness trained you to stand alone. Discipline trained you to show up without reward. Now all of it converges. You become someone who doesn't need external confirmation. That's the key. Recognition used to feel necessary because you hadn't tested yourself enough. Now you have. You know how you respond under pressure. You know how you act when tired. You know what you do when no one is watching. That knowledge replaces validation. It cannot be taken from you. And that makes you dangerous, in the best way. Solid people are hard to manipulate, hard to intimidate, hard to distract, because they don't need anything from anyone. They are internally complete. You have a choice. Remain dependent, or become self-contained. That's the key. Let's get practical one final time. Here is how solidity is maintained. First, keep your standards private and strict. Don't negotiate them publicly. Don't soften them for approval. Second, let recognition pass without attachment. Enjoy it briefly. Release it immediately. Third, return to the work. Always return to the work. The work keeps you grounded. Solid people don't live in moments. They live in systems. Systems don't care about attention. They produce results. You'll notice something interesting when you reach this stage. People may praise you, but it won't excite you. People may doubt you, but it won't disturb you. Because neither changes your direction. That's mental toughness at its highest level. Not aggression. Not dominance. Stability. You don't react. You don't chase. You don't prove. You move. This is what it means to be unshakable. And unshakable people don't announce who they are. They demonstrate it over time. That's the key. Recognition is loud. Solidity is silent. Recognition fades. Solidity compounds. This is why silence was always the foundation. Silence gave you space to build without distortion, without pressure, without distraction. Now you understand. Mental toughness was never about being hard. It was about being whole, complete without applause, focused without validation, disciplined without motivation. You have a choice. Return to noise, or remain solid. Noise will always be there. Validation will always be available. But solidity must be protected. And it is protected through silence. You no longer need to disappear to grow. You no longer need to explain to defend. You no longer need recognition to continue. You've earned certainty. And certainty changes how you walk, how you speak, how you decide. Quietly. This is the final lesson. Mental toughness is not something you perform. It is something you embody. When you are solid, silence is no longer strategy. It's identity. And identity doesn't seek permission. It moves forward. Unannounced. Unbothered. Unstoppable.